Okay, well, I'm seeing just about 100 people here, so some more will be joining, but let's begin. My name is Joseph Gerson. I'm the president of the Campaign for Peace, Disarmament, and Common Security. I want to welcome you on behalf of CPDCS, but also the Massachusetts Peace Action and Peace Action of New York State. I want to especially thank Mariana Fernandez for anchoring this webinar from Buenos Aires, of all places, amidst the excitement of their national football soccer team, which is headed for Sunday's final in the World Cup, in the corrupt hub today of global soccer in Doha. I also want to express my condolences to Reiner Braun, who's with us, just an intense soccer fan. That Germany didn't make it, and he's going to have to watch France and Argentina. Friends, we meet amidst the human disaster of the still escalating war in Ukraine. Many of us are working for a Christmas truce, but with President Zelensky demanding that all Russian forces withdraw before negotiations can resume, and President Putin requiring Ukrainian recognition of its recent annexations, is looking to be a longer and even more catastrophic war with pressures for further escalation on all sides. So it's a dangerous situation. This is why CPTCS and our partner organizations thought it important to provide today's forum with my friend and colleague, Reiner Braun. Reiner has long been a leader of the German and European peace movements and has recently returned from Russia, where he met with a wide range of figures, including people inside the Kremlin elite and war opponents. Reiner has been active in the peace movement for 4 decades, beginning his work with the Krefeld Appeal, excuse the pronunciation, against the new nuclear weapons in Europe back in 1982. Since 1983, he served in leading positions with Scientists for Peace and Sustainability in Germany, the International Network of Engineers and Scientists for Global Responsibility, German and international associations for lawyers against nuclear arms, the German Bugwash Group, and more recently as the executive director of the International Peace Bureau. Along the way, he's worked on various projects related to the Einstein Year at the Max Planck Institute for the History of Science in Berlin and for the Max Planck Society more generally. He is the author of several books, including Einstein and Peace and a biography of the Peace Nobel laureate, Joseph Rotblat. With the title of today's webinar being Russia and Europe, the Ukraine War and Possibilities for Euro-Atlantic Peace, Reiner will report on his impressions and lessons from his recent time in Russia and share his take on the priorities of the European peace movements. After Reiner's opening remarks, I may have a few questions for him, and then we'll turn to your questions and answers, or your questions and his answers. Please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to post your questions. And to make it easier for the MC, if you are driven to chat, please use the chat box and not the Q&A function so I can more easily identify the questions when they come in. With that, Reiner, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Joseph, and welcome all of you. And for you, it's a good day. For me, it's a quite late evening. You know, let me put in the middle point of the first round my visit to Moscow. I was visiting Moscow from the 22nd to the 29th of November. What I will say and report are impressions. This is not a scientific work. This is definitely not a full picture of what happened in Moscow and what are the people thinking. These are impressions from political visits, private visits, discussion with friends, colleagues. I met a quite huge branch of different organizations which are in opposite to the war, scientific organizations which are near to the government, members of the Duma, scientists, Mothers Against War. And it is not easy to summarize the political positions of the people. First of all, it is definitely there is definitely not one position pro or against the war. There is a huge diversity of positions when you are discussing with these people in Moscow. First of all, when I summarize my trip, the atmosphere is depressive. People are have a depressive motivation and mood because they have really fear that the war in Ukraine will enlarge to a big war. A war which includes, in the minimum, Europe, but maybe the whole world. This means there is no hurrah support for the war. There's more an atmosphere of silent fear. And when you want to have an argument for that, when I was coming to Moscow from the airport to the city, I had to use the metro. And for the first time in my life, when I was in Moscow, the metro was empty. That never happened. And I asked, what's here? After I recognize this, I need some minutes to recognize this. Then my friends were telling me, yes, people are staying home. They are reducing to go out. There is no really atmosphere for celebrations or for parties. Theaters and cinemas are more empty. So this is one sign of this atmosphere. In opposition to this, and this shows that there is no unity in my report, people are going shopping for Christmas. A lot. There is really a consumer run. And the supermarkets are full of everything. The interesting point is the products are changing. For many, many years, you could buy in Moscow very bad German wine. There's no bad German wine any longer. Instead of that, you can drink the nice Chile or South African wine. And there is not any longer yogurt from France or Germany or Austria. Now the yogurt is coming either from Turkey or from some of the Arabic states. So the products and where the products were coming from changed as a consequences of the so-called sanctions. When I'm discussing about the concerns, you have to recognize that about 700,000 young people, men, left the country. Many of them are leaving the country not because of a very clear anti-war position in general, but of a position that they, as individuals, don't want to be engaged in this war. They don't want to again go to the front in Ukraine. These 700,000 people are mainly coming from university and high intelligent people. The first one who go to the foreign countries are getting really good jobs. We have some who are now working at the Max Planck Institute here in Germany. So this is really a loss of brain, which will have a lot of consequences for the whole country. One highly interesting voice, but what also shows the problem, are the voices of the mothers and brides against the war. These mothers and brides are not all of them are against the war in general, but they don't want that their sons, these are mainly sons, are going to a war where they are not trained for, where they have not the right weapons, and where they don't get the right clothes. So what they want is a much more effective war, and it's not only an anti-war position. This effectiveness of war is a general feeling in the whole society. The people are believing what's happened here. Why is our army so bad and is losing weapons, equipment, and influence? And this creates a new atmosphere in the society for looking for a new kind of political establishment in the country. People are deeply disappointed from the elites, from the political establishment, above all from the presidential offices. And this is a totally new situation. And this shows that maybe the so-called system of Putin, the governmental system, really comes into a crisis, may even comes to an end. The opposition in the army against the war or against the ineffectiveness of the war is quite strong. Above all, in the lower range of officers, they are deeply disappointed with the corrupt leadership in the whole army. Corrupt leadership is not only in Ukraine, you also can see this in the Russian army. When you are looking to the houses, or better to say to the castles of the general, of the leaders of the different parts of the army, you can't get this from the salary of a general. So you must be a part of the corrupt system. And this is an atmosphere. What's happened with our country when you don't have a strong army and when we have such a corrupt system? But let me tell you a little bit about the anti-war activities. The biggest network of anti-war activities are the feminist women against the war. This is a network of about 1,500 to 2,000 women all over Russia, which in different cities are organizing protests against the war. In the big cities, you have the opposition of the war by individuals, small anti-war groups, and the radical political left to the Communist Party. The Communist Party in its majority is one of the biggest supporters of Putin and the war. There's only a minority in the Communist Party which is against the war. When you are looking to the more governmental-oriented institutions like Academy of Sciences, like Lomonosov University, you can feel the opposition against the war, but you cannot see really protest against the war. In the academy, they are discussing and planning new peace architecture structures for Europe. But both institutions, or the people of both institutions which I met, are saying that a ceasefire and a step for negotiations is absolutely important. Negotiation is a key point where many are thinking this could be a way out of this difficult situation. When you ask me, is the opposition strong enough for a regime change or for a change of the government or the elites? I can easily say no. The opposition is a little bit an internal opposition in the elites, and there is a small opposition in the society, but they are absolutely not strong enough for bigger changes in the society. The elites are more or less united in support of the economic development of the country. And economically, Russia has problems with high-tech technologies, problems with the newest development of the computer systems, high technology, electronic and others. But many parts of the society, the economy is working quite normal. The agriculture system is totally autark. The products of grapes were rising. It is the biggest number of grapes they got this year. So the economic situation is even better than it was in the beginning. The ruble is quite stable. It's much more stable than 2 years ago. Now it is related to euro. It is 1 to 58. It was 2 years ago, 1 euro to 78 rubles. So this is much better. This is quite constant, and there is no sign that the society will break down. The export of oil and gas is expanding, above all to Asian countries. Russia have new gas and oil agreements with India, Philippines, Malaysia, China. The trade to India is growing by 300% in the last months. So they have a lot of hard currency for the next steps of the economic development. And the end of the trade to the Western countries leads to a situation that the autarky in the countries is growing. More and more parts of the society are autark and don't need foreign trade. The biggest problem is the high technology development. That is the biggest problem. Computer scientists and everything connected to these questions. What are the people thinking about the way out of the crisis? I think there is no so much difference to our discussion about the Vatican plan and others. Everyone believes that the situation in Ukraine can only be solved by a neutral Ukraine. Ukraine cannot join NATO, by discussion about a new autonomous status of Donetsk and Lugansk. This is a very critical discussion after the reunification of these, unification of these parts of form of Ukraine with Russia. So this new Russian legal system and the development of a peace plan makes it not easy, but there is definitely possible for some solutions. Some of our leading figures like Jeffrey Sachs and von Schulenburg, the diplomats, have developed some suggestions to this. So there are possibilities to solve this problem and to come to an agreement for a ceasefire. Everything, and I would like to underline this, and you know, I think I mentioned no names. The repression to the opposition, to the radical left, to the peace groups, to the anti-war activists is really high. All offices of the foundations, including the offices of the left organizations, are closed, and people are staying under quite strong control. The system of foreign agents is advanced, and everyone who has critical voices or has a critical opinion can be punished as foreign agent. We can even see this by some of our friends, whom we're working in IPB together. They have a lot of problems. So that is also a big problem. And so what are the consequences for me and maybe also for the peace movement? And then maybe I speak the last 5 minutes to the peace movement. I think when I'm speaking about the differences in the peace movement, there is no big difference between the opinions in the United States and in Germany. We have different opinions, what some people are calling sanctions, what other people are calling economic war. We have smaller differences, but we are overcoming these differences in the questions of weapons export to Ukraine. We had a big annual peace meeting of the German peace movement over the weekend, and it is united in the points: no sanctions, no weapons to Ukraine, ceasefire, negotiations, and a new peace architecture for Europe, which include disarmament, arms control, and new forms of cooperation, and the agreement, and everyone agreed that the European security system is only possible with Russia and not without Russia. So that is, and the problem of the peace movement is, from my understanding, not the lack of common positions. I think we have more in common that has divided us. The biggest problem is that we are not able up to now for a mass mobilization. We are able to mobilize for actions, even bigger actions, but this is not really a mass mobilization. And our discussion from the weekend said the key challenge for the next year is really to develop a broader opposition against the war for common security. Common security and the philosophy of common security is the agreed point for all parts of the German peace movement. And we have our first actions in the beginning of February, or in the mid of February, when this Munich Security Conference will happen again. And we agreed to organize a big demonstration around this Munich Security Conference. And definitely we will have big actions over Easter. We are coming back to more and bigger traditional Easter marches. Maybe these are my words in the beginning as introduction, and I'm happy to answer questions when I can.
Thank you, Reiner. It was very helpful. I mean, here in the United States, we really don't get a clear picture of what's happening inside of Russia. So this is very, very helpful. Let me ask two questions, and then we'll go to Q&A. The first is, throughout the fall and earlier in the summer, we were hearing, somewhat panicked reports about what energy and heating supplies in Europe would be, and what their consequences would be for the war. I wonder if you can tell us what the energy and winter looks like in Europe.
It's cold in Europe. And, we have big problems. Above all people, the poor people and the people which are living with limited conditions in their day-to-day life. They have big problems for surviving, for getting enough food, for heating their houses, and for surviving over the months. The inflation and the cost for food and for the daily needs is rising, definitely more than 10%. And this creates a lot of problems. You can see on the street more people without housing. You can hear when you discuss this in the subway or the bus that people are deeply concerned if they can pay the next bill for their rent and the so-called second rent, the social costs. This is really a big problem for 50 to 60% of our German people, which are living mainly under conditions that they can survive, not really bad, but they don't have really reserves. When you don't have reserves, you have big problems to pay all the bills. So we have an atmosphere here that we have a reduction of going shopping before Christmas, which is the most important time for shopping in Germany. This reduced dramatically this year. And this has consequences for the whole industry, for the whole production system in our country. So we are really concerned about the future. We are concerned about the prices for gas and oil. And it is an atmosphere in the country that people really don't know what will happen in the future. So it's not a good atmosphere, but it is not an atmosphere of opposition. We have not a broad opposition in the society, which you can see day to day in the streets. The only opposition in the street, and this is quite big, is in East Germany. In East Germany, we have protest demonstrations in the smaller cities where 20%, even 30 or 35% of the population of the city are joining the demonstrations. These are big actions. We don't have them in West Germany and the rest, and we don't have them in the big cities, but we have them in the east part of Germany. And we are all waiting what will happen in the future. Everyone is really looking from day to day what will happen in the future. And what I'm saying to Germany, I think you can generalize this for Western and also for Southern Europe. We have quite all the same problems.
So a question that's also come up in the Q&A. Well, let me just say a couple of people have raised their hands, I see, and I can't see you. So please, if you have questions, please put them into the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Reiner, anticipating questions that have emerged from several people, can you tell us what's happening with the call for a Christmas truce, both how that's operating now, and how you see it given the positions of both the Ukrainian and the Russian governments?
Tomorrow we are sending the letter to Gutierrez and ask them also on the background of our appeal to make a statement for a ceasefire appeal over Christmas. And let's see what will be the result. I'm quite happy that we get a lot of support. And when we have got a lot of messages from different organizations that they are supporting the appeal, that they are sending around the appeal in their organizations, in their distribution lists. So this is really positive. So, and the positive result is that we put the discussion on ceasefire really of the agenda of the international discussion of the social movements, not only of the peace movement. That is the positive thing. Hopefully we will get you in the next days more signatures. This number could definitely be enlarged during the next 2 or 3 days, and we will present the appeal to the General Secretary of the United Nations and to the OSCE and other international institutions. That will happen with the appeal. And the reaction of the appeal, I think you know this like me, Zelensky was saying we can make a ceasefire when the Russian troops are out of the country. This is not the character of a ceasefire. The character of a ceasefire is to stop killing and to open the door for negotiations, and not to win the war and then call for ceasefire. So this is not really, not to say realistic. It is not the position of ceasefire. A ceasefire in a war should stop the war without having someone who is winning the war, and open the door for negotiations, for coming to a peace process. And Putin only announced that he has nothing against it when the Ukrainians are supporting it. So we definitely need more pressure. And our idea is to enlarge the pressure to get in contact with countries of the global south, because we get some interesting voices from presidents and vice presidents from the global south, which are also always say negotiation is a key point for ending this war at the end of the year. Yesterday, the president of Colombia was again announcing that he is calling for ceasefire. Lula has announced it some days ago. So we have other countries which are putting the pressure on us. I heard today the president of Indonesia speaking at the Asian-European meeting say what we need is a political solution and negotiations for Ukraine. So I think important is that other parts of the world are engaging themselves in this process and are pushing for negotiations and ceasefire.
And my last question before turning to those in the Q&A, I'm going to, if you will, somewhat abuse a question that was in the chat. Thinking in terms of a future European security architecture, how do you envision that coming into being between what I would describe as two imperialist forces, that of the United States and NATO on the one hand and Russia on the other?
First of all, the good point is that we have neutral countries in Europe. The neutral countries were playing a very important role in the process of détente in the 70s and 80s. This is mainly Austria, this is Ireland, and some smaller ones. And I think they can again play an important role. The second is, what are the social movements do? And I think we need a process which is a little bit similar to the process which leads to the Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. Countries which are willing to start a process for a new peace architecture in Europe, parliamentarians which agree in these positions, societal organizations, big ones like churches or trade unions, which are in favor of this process. And the peace movement should try to come together to develop such a project and such steps in this direction. From my point of view, this will not happen from today to tomorrow. I hope that we can develop such a process with some results to the year 2025, when we have the 50th anniversary of the Helsinki Agreement from 75. The next steps again is nothing will happen without ceasefire negotiations in Ukraine. This is the first step. And then hopefully some of the more neutral countries and not NATO-oriented countries will start a process of dialogue and cooperation, bring their voices together for a common process, combined with voices from parliamentarian and other social movements.
Okay, so then turning to the questions we have here, and I see about 21, so we'll keep us busy here. Cheryl Spencer asks, please tell us more about the feminist women who you mentioned who are organizing against the war, and how could WILPF will help them?
This organization was founded before the Ukrainian war by some women, mainly coming from the big cities around Krasnoyarsk, Moscow, and St. Petersburg. And this is now a group connected over internet, I think in about 30 cities in Ukraine, but also on quite a lot of villages. They are connected by internet and they are making actions. They have done protest action in the beginning of the war. They were on the streets with posters protesting against the war, say that they are against the war and that they don't want to have it. And they are connected by internet. They make several events. We have, as IPB, contacts to some of them. We gave the McBride Award from last year to one of the ladies which is engaged in this group. What we can do, we should be very careful, but we can invite them to Zoom conference and others. They are not always able to attend because of repression they have, but they want to have the contact to us. So please try to get in contact with them, speak with them, discuss with them, organize smaller online events, and help them to be a group. Other help, I think, is counterproductive. We should take them as independent national activists. That is the best help I think we can do for them. And we will have an event with them who want to do it in his calendar on the day where the war is 1 year old, on the 24th of February. We are planning an event together with others about voices from Russia and Ukraine against the war. And there we will definitely have some of these colleagues, but we will also have colleagues which are coming from the critical environmental movement, activists which are coming more or less from the radical left position and are against the war. So we will try to bring together some voices against the war to show that there is under very difficult conditions also protest and opposition in Russia.
So people can go to the IPB webpage to both sign the Christmas Truce Appeal and also to follow these plans. And the web address is ipb.org, so you can go there. It's a question from Kevin Martin for Reiner. Did you hear or sense a concern in Russia that the war could escalate to a nuclear conflict?
Yes.
You mentioned concern about the war widening generally.
Yes. You know, that is a deep concern, that the war can escalate in the region. You know, around Ukraine, there are some other regional critical points where a war can happen, Georgia, Moldavia, Transnistria. And there is a huge concern that this war can escalate to a nuclear war. This is really a deep concern, above all in the scientific community. People which have worked, discussed, and know the consequences of nuclear war, they are deeply concerned. At the institutes, at the Academy of Science there was always the question which we can do to reduce the nuclear danger. And many of them were saying, we need again negotiations for the New START agreement. The negotiation should have happened even under these difficult conditions we are working now. And as a part of the European security architecture, they are always saying important are agreements about nuclear disarmament or the minimum nuclear weapons arms control. So yes, there is really a deep, deep concern in Russia that has also to do with the history of Russia and their knowledge about wars and the consequences of wars.
Okay, there's a question here from, I mean, okay, is not exactly what we want to say in the face of possible nuclear war, but moving forward here, and encouraging people to do what we can to end this war. A question from Anna Howard. If Crimea, Luhansk, and Donetsk regions are left with Russia now, do you think Putin will not start another war for more Ukrainian territory in 4 or 6 years from now, after taking time to rearm? I mean, this is what we hear in terms of some Ukrainian fears, in terms of moving to negotiate before they can regain their territory. I can say something more about Crimea, but I'll be quiet about that for now.
You know, I'm not Putin, and I cannot look in his brain. What can we do to protect the whole region and to avoid wars? First of all, definitely, again, I can only underline this: negotiations and the process is important. But the next very important point is, I think, is what was mentioned in the Istanbul Agreement and also in the Vatican documents, is we need security observers and countries which are controlling the security agreements. And these countries could not only come from Europe, they have to come from other parts of the world, and they have to include the big powers. This could help to avoid, again, conflict and wars. The second is we have to put away the background why these wars happened. And these wars happened because of the NATO enlargement to the east, and that we never take into account the security interests of Russia. And without taking into account the security interests of Russia, or to say it, to develop a politics on common security, that both security interests have to be in account, we will always come to the same situation. And when we want to have a security system in Europe which is balanced, we have to discuss about missile defense system, we have to discuss about satellites and control systems. And I think we are able, like in the 70s, to develop again a system, a balanced system for common security in Europe. That is the only alternative that one side ever will again start a war when he or she believes that a war is helpful for one side. So we have to come away from a one-sided security policies to a policy of common security. This is, from my understanding, the only alternative to avoid wars. And, you know, I'm a little bit in doubt about future Russian aggressions against Ukrainian. You know, the consequences of these wars for Russia, the Russian army, the Russian people, quite bad. And I'm very much in doubt that we will have a revitalization of such a politics. I can even imagine that we have the chance, when both sides are going one step forward, to come to first agreement in the right direction of common security.
Thank you, Reiner. A question here from Yossi McIntyre. What is keeping Putin from bringing out the big guns? We could read today that a military commander in Donetsk is saying the only way that Russia can prevail is with nuclear weapons. And we're also reading of the possibility that the next step in escalation might be broad cyber attacks, but rather than nuclear attacks. What's keeping Russia from moving in that direction?
You know, from my understanding, this is also not in the interest of Russia. You know, Russia will be destroyed more. Russia will be more and more destroyed in this war. It is a cyber war up to now. The latest site for the cyber war was the attack on the bridge on Crimea, and we have now day-to-day attacks to Russian territorium and to territorium which Russia is calling the new republics, and I would call it the Donetsk, Lugansk region. They are a part of the war. So, and this is not helpful for the people, it's not helpful for the Russian politics. I think Russia and the political elite in Russia is more and more interested to come to a solution for the Ukrainian problem. Even when they were in the beginning the aggressor, they lost tremendously part of the war. This includes the attack to Kiev, which was a deeply mistaken. This includes other attacks. I think with suggestions for a peace process now, we have really a chance. And for me, the biggest obstacle is that we are now sending day-to-day new weapons into Ukraine. Weapons are not solving any of these problems. And, you know, think one moment, the people in Ukraine were before the war about 44 million. In 2015, it was 52 million. 8 million were leaving the country. Many of them are living now in Russia. And with the war now, 10 million people left the country as refugees to both sides, Russia or to the Western countries. So the population of Ukraine is about 30 million, a little bit more. And about 1 million people are suffering by the war directly. People are speaking about 100,000 dead people and about 200,000 to 300,000 wounded people. How long such a country can continue the war? How long? It's time to come to an end. Russia can make the war longer, but the victims in Russia are at the minimum on the same level. And this, in addition, we have to say the 700,000 young people which are leaving the country. So both sides, from my understanding, are coming more and more to a situation where they don't have the power to think about winning the war. And only both sides have the possibility to continue killing without coming to an end of the war, or without winning the war, but more and more destroying the country. And think about the Ukrainian situation. You can say Russia is destroying Ukraine. This is partly true. But Ukraine is also destroying their country themselves by their own utterly, their own fight, their own bombing. So this means this country comes when we are not coming to a ceasefire and to agreements physically quite quick to an end. And one of the diplomats, we had a discussion with Sachs and with von Schulenburg. They have their opinion that Ukrainian is really quite at the end. And the only point which makes them hope that they can survive are the weapons from the Western countries. So that's a little bit of describing the situation, how I heard it in Russia, but also get in contact with people which are more or less expert on these fields, like the diplomats and like Jeffrey Sachs and others who are working in the Vatican working group. So the chance, there is a small chance to get to more agreements. And maybe we have to think about agreements which are even under the line or under the level of ceasefire. This could be the exchange of soldiers. Both sides have about 10,000, 15,000 captured soldiers, which they have to feed, which is useless for them, but they are suffering. And this could be to develop the grain export, because, you know, the southern countries, the global south needs this much more. Fertilizer is, the whole world is crying for fertilizers now. And they are lying in Russia and they are lying in the harbors of Ukraine. In both harbor systems, they are lying. It's difficult to export them, not only because of the Dardanelles, but above all because of the mines in the Black Sea. So an agreement could be, let's put the mines away. This could be an agreement before a ceasefire. And there are maybe other possibilities for agreement before we are coming to negotiations about the whole peace process. As trust-building operations, as methods to come together and to see that the way to peace is better than the way to war. So this is also, I think, a very important point for the future work at the beginning of the next year.
Thank you, Reiner. I mean, that's very helpful in terms of seeing intermediate steps that we can take. Kind of related to what you're just saying here, we have a question from David Keppel. Say hello to David, who's done good work for a long time. He writes, Zelensky's terms seem deliberately humiliating. Do you think the Russian government would agree to peace if we gave them somewhat face-saving terms and put some parentheses related to NATO expansion, Crimea, or perhaps some of Donbass. So I guess part of the question is, to what degree is Zelensky the problem, and what kind of compromises could you envision on the part of Ukraine?
You know, like me, when the negotiations start, you start with the negotiation point, and then there are the development to compromises for common agreements. For me, I also learned this. For me, the positions are along the Minsk agreement, the agreement from Istanbul, and the agreements and the suggestion from the Vatican. And you can say also from the Mexican government, also from the Italian government, there are not so much difference. So first point is neutrality and no NATO membership. This needs a change of the Ukrainian constitution. Second is neutrality. No, second is a specific, more independent role of Donetsk and Lugansk in Ukraine. Autonomous status agreed by a people's vote under international control. This is maybe the most difficult point because of the Russian constitution now. Russia explained these parts to a part of Russia. So this can only be changed by a Russian constitution, by a people's vote. Then parts of the country can leave the country and go to another country. So we need the agreement of the character of these new statutes in Ukraine, and then we need a people's vote in these regions to accept this. All of that must be under democratic international control, which means United Nations and their sub-organization, OSCE and whatever. Third point is a discussion of a new peace architecture in Europe, which includes a demilitarization along the border between Russia and NATO, not only in Ukraine, but along the long, long border. This means demilitarization means no missile defense system, which can be immediately changed to an offensive system. This means maybe troops away from the border by 200 or 500 kilometers. This means definitely specific controls from both sides to the other side and other kinds of demilitarization along the border. Definitely it means the reduction, that all the Russian troops has to go home, and we need a security guarantees for Ukraine by a mix of big countries and small countries, maybe under the leadership of countries which are independent coming from the south, so which are acceptable for both. This is definitely like something like India is a possible candidate, but also Israel is a possible candidate for that. For my understanding, these negotiations will not work without moderation or mediator. And there's a suggestion of the Mexican foreign minister that India should be one of these mediator or moderator. I think it will not work without Turkey. Turkey has a possibility to influence both sides. And I think that it also will not work without the more important active role of China. China must use their influence for putting pressure on Russia. Because this war is, and everyone who's working a little bit with China knows a little bit, it is absolutely against the Chinese strategy. They want so quick as possible the end of this war. So maybe they really can play a more active role. Medea, I know, I can imagine why you are saying no to Israel, but please have in mind that Israel is one of the countries which has contacts to both sides. And maybe this is a reason to accept them as a negotiation partner which can help to bring this war to an end. I'm saying this not because I love Israel or other countries. I also don't love the Turkish government, but I'm saying this by a realistic geostrategic thinking. So that is a short answer, because I read it here that you were saying that.
So again, I'm going to squeeze in 2 and maybe 3, I don't know, last questions here. From Alice Slater, she's asking why the demonstrations in East Germany? Who are they protesting against? And what about let's leave it there. That'll keep you going.
To say it in 1 or 2 sentences, not to speak too, it is they are suffering more under the social consequences of the so-called sanction or economic war, because they have no background financial resources in East Germany. Where should they get them? And the unemployment rate is higher, the incomes are higher. And, the East Germans has from their own history a specific relations against war. They hate war. This is a part of their, how do you say this, their gene or their blood. So this is maybe this combination of protests against the social consequences and the war. This is the background that the activities in East Germany are much, much higher than in West Germany. And, one of the key points of the German politics, and I cannot this explain in details, but I will say it in a little bit more general, is a very horrible double moral or double standards. On one side, we are saying Russia is the most worst in the world, and we are working closely together with Qatar and Saudi Arabia. One side, we are criticizing and say we need democracy, and we are working closely together with the most undemocratic countries in the world. And the East Germans have a good feeling for these double standards, because they know what it is in the process of reunification and the consequences of the reunification. And this brings them much more to the street than in other parts of Germany.
So I'll come to the second part of Alice's question, but just by way of background for people going to an earlier response that you had, there is a major German NATO initiative now for a massive new comprehensive integrated missile defense system to, if you will, consolidate control over Europe and over Russia. And I'll send out a link to an article about that when I send out the link here. So the last 2 questions, Alice is also asking about if there are any campaigns for the removal of U.S. nuclear weapons in the NATO countries. And I know you're deeply involved in that.
Oh, yeah. Yes. I'm absolutely convinced that we will have bigger anti-nuclear weapons activities in the next year. We are now buying the F-35, which every day becomes more expensive. We have every day new figures how expensive it is. And we will get the new nukes should come to Germany in the beginning or in the middle of the year 23 and 24. So now we have these protests. We have these protests in a network together with colleagues in Italy, Dutch, and Belgium. So we are definitely working on this. And we are closely combined with the fight of our British colleagues against the new US nuclear weapons in Britain. So that is a key challenge in Europe. And we are doing our best. I know this is not good enough, but we are trying really our best to engage people and to make a bigger and a mass mobilization against these nuclear weapons in Europe. Yes.
And that of course means that those of us here in the United States have to work to bring them back, bring them out, and actually decommission them. So a last question here from Frederick Trost: where is the Church, Catholic and evangelical, in the call for negotiations?
The problem why I'm hesitating with my answer is in Germany and in the main part of Europe, we have two big social factors in the society which are quiet. These are the churches and the trade unions. And this is really, for us, a big, big problem. The trade unions are internationally quite quiet because of the war-oriented influence of the East and Central Europe trade unions, which are dividing the trade unions international movement. And I'm happy that we have a quite clear statement from the World Conference of the International Trade Unions Confederation speaking out against the war and for ceasefire. But the mobilization under these divided trade unions movement is very difficult. And in the same, the European Catholics are quiet. The only voice you can hear is the Pope. But this is for us a big problem. And you know, my colleagues from Pax Christi, my friends from Pax Christi are doing this the best to move and to push and to argue that they have to play a more active role. But this is one of our big problems, that the peace movement in the situation now is still quite isolated from other social movements, which are really not opposing this war on the streets, not calling for ceasefire, not calling for negotiations. This is a problem of our work, and we are doing our best to overcome the problem and to unite the different movements again and to unite these forces in a common struggle for ceasefire negotiation. But it is a problem.
So we're all doing our best. You know, before giving you a minute for a last word here, Reiner, I just want to, if you will, apologize. We had, 37 questions here. We couldn't get to all of them. But I want to thank participants who have joined us. And I want to give Reiner sort of a last word here, kind of a last message that you want to send, recognizing that our audience is primarily, but not exclusively, people here in the United States.
You know, when you want to stop the war, we can only do this together on both sides of the Atlantic. It reminds me a little bit of the beginning of our activities against the Vietnam War. In the beginning, in the opposition of the Vietnam War, we also were not so many on the streets. And I know how difficult it was at that time to get in contact with US colleagues. We were in contact with the US soldiers, which were here in Europe, because of all the social and electronic and communication problems. But now we have together the same responsibility. We have to do our best to unite our forces and to see what we can do. And maybe this 24th of February, this 1 year anniversary, is a good chance to show that we have a common activity on both sides of the Atlantic. And you know, my dream is that we in the year 2023 come in Germany and in Europe really to mass demonstration against the war and for disarmament against nuclear weapons and for social change. And maybe then we also can say we can do this together on both sides of the Atlantic. It is absolutely needed. So I wish you the best for the next 2 weeks. I hope you can also recover a little bit after this horrible year. I think this was a year full of stress, and hopefully we can next year develop common activities and action. It is absolutely needed, and it is our responsibility, and we have to do the best what we can.
Reiner, thank you, and thank you for everyone who joined us. I know we're going into the holidays here, but that's no reason to stop following what's happening, making your voices heard, working against the refusal of the United States and NATO and Zelensky to negotiate, and push as we can. So thank you.
And Jonathan, when there is a wish to continue this discussion, I think I'm definitely open, and I think some of my colleagues like Ludo or Kate are also willing to answer from their perspective. So it's up to you. When I saw so many people raising their hands and their voices, maybe we find a possibility for continue this discussion. I think it's great that we have this exchange over the Atlantic.
That's great. I mean, thank you for the suggestion, and working with Ludo, Kate, and others in the network are, they're wonderful people and a lot for us to learn from and to build together. So thank you very much for that suggestion, Reiner. And take care, and we will be sending the links out to everyone who registered, and hopefully we may have also saved the chat as well. Take care, and everyone be well and do good.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.